Picture this for a second. You're the head of engineering at Netflix. It's a Monday morning, traffic is absolutely peaking, with 50 million users streaming their favorite shows. And then, one of your own engineers deliberately crashes a core production server, on purpose, right in the middle of the workday. Sounds like a literal nightmare scenario, right? Well, actually, scratch that. What if I told you this isn't a mistake at all? It's a highly refined, brilliantly designed strategy. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking the absolutely fascinating architecture of the Simian Army and the whole practice of chaos engineering. So this really brings us to the central question driving our entire discussion today. What if you just invited failure into production? You know, instead of sitting around waiting in fear for that inevitable 2 a.m. pager alert, what if you seized control and initiated the failure on your own terms? To the central question driving our entire discussion today. What if you just invited failure into production? You know, instead of sitting around waiting in fear for that inevitable 2 a.m. pager alert, what if you seized control and initiated the failure on your own terms? Okay. Let's dive into this and look at the core difference in mindset here. On one side, we've got traditional engineering. This is a highly defensive posture. You build your system, you test it in a nice, safe, isolated staging environment, and you basically just hope it holds up in the real world. But let's be real. A staging environment cannot possibly simulate 50 million concurrent users. Then, on the flip side, we have chaos engineering. This is purely offensive. It totally embraces the fact that live production is just messy, and therefore you literally have to test in live production. You don't hide from the chaos, right? You engineer it.
Here's the roadmap for our explainer today. We're going to cover the distributed dilemma, the birth of Chaos Monkey, the Simian Army architecture, the chaos philosophy, and finally wrap up with the industry impact.
All right, jumping into part one, the distributed dilemma, when systems inevitably break. To really appreciate the solution, we kinda have to understand the massive scale of the problem. Modern cloud infrastructure relies on hundreds of microservices and thousands of dynamic servers. In systems like that, failure isn't just a possibility, it's a 100% absolute guarantee. In Netflix, well, they learned this the hard way. Look at this number, 3 days. Back in 2008, a major database corruption took down Netflix's entire DVD shipping service. For 3 whole days, millions of customers were completely left in the dark. It was agonizing. But you know, it was also exactly the painful catalyst they needed to rethink how they approached reliability in the cloud. Which leads us to part 2, the birth of Chaos Monkey, planting the seed. So, that 3-day outage really planted a seed. The engineering team realized, hey, we have to stop waiting around for late-night surprises and start actively initiating them, but in a controlled way. Following that 2008 disaster, Netflix kicked off a massive migration over to Amazon Web Services in 2010, and it was right during this shift to the cloud that they created a beautifully simple yet deeply destructive tool, Chaos Monkey. This was basically a software agent designed to just randomly select and terminate virtual machine instances running in production. Bam, gone. If your auto recovery couldn't handle a single instance vanishing, Chaos Monkey would expose that flaw immediately. It was such a game changer that by 2011, they actually open sourced these concepts for the rest of us.
Moving on to part 3, Simian Army architecture, testing the cloud.
Now, what's really interesting about this setup is that Netflix quickly realized a single monkey just wasn't enough to test the true fragility of modern infrastructure. Real-world failures are way more complex. So they build an escalating architecture of destruction. As you can see, we start at the bottom tier of cloud infrastructure with Chaos Monkey, which targets individual AWS EC2 instances, making sure no single point of failure exists. But then we scale up. Chaos Gorilla targets the next architectural tier, simulating the complete offline failure of an entire AWS availability zone. And finally, the absolute heavy hitter, Chaos Kong. This simulates the catastrophic failure of an entire AWS region, meaning a whole geographical area, like US East, just completely vanishes. By systematically destroying these specific infrastructure components, Netflix literally forces its systems to automatically route traffic across global regions without missing a single beat.
But here's the thing. Outright failure isn't the only threat out there. Latency Monkey targets the network layer by injecting artificial delays between services. And in a distributed architecture, a slow dependency is often way worse than a dead one. Think about it. If a database is just running super slowly, it can tie up server resources waiting for a response, leading to what's known as a cascading timeout failure.
That kind of thing brings the whole system crashing down. Latency monkey forces engineers to build proper timeouts and fallback mechanisms directly into their architecture.
Next up, we have the enforcers. These are built right into the active management of the cloud environment. Conformity Monkey scans autoscaling groups to ensure instances are actually following architectural best practices and tagging rules, and if they aren't, it just shuts them down, no exceptions. Then we have Dr. Monkey, which is kind of like the health inspector. It constantly monitors for things like CPU spikes or memory leaks. The crucial point here is that when Dr. Monkey finds a sick instance, it doesn't just send a passive alert. It physically interacts with the cloud architecture to instantly remove that unhealthy instance from the load balancer. That guarantees bad nodes never, ever serve user traffic.
Finally, this architecture includes the cleaners. Security Monkey acts as this automated auditor, constantly hunting through the cloud infrastructure for exposed open ports, risky security groups, and IAM, that's Identity and Access Management, misconfigurations. It can actively terminate any instances that violate security policies. Meanwhile, Janitor Monkey sweeps through the AWS environment, finding all those expensive idle resources, things like orphan storage snapshots and unused load balancers. It securely deletes them to optimize costs, keeping the whole environment clean and lean. All right, let's shift to part 4, the chaos philosophy, beyond the tools.
Let's take a step back from the technical architecture for just a second. Because while the Simian Army is undeniably an incredible set of tools, chaos engineering, at its absolute core, is a profound philosophy. I really love this quote from the pioneers at Netflix: "Hope is not a strategy." You simply cannot design a resilient architecture on a whiteboard and just cross your fingers, hoping it holds up under pressure. System resilience is something that has to be actively proven through repeated, scientific experiments.
Think of it exactly like a fire drill. You don't just assume a building is safe because the architect handed you a nice glossy safety manual, right? No, you pull the fire alarm. You actually practice the evacuation. Chaos engineering builds that exact same kind of organizational muscle memory. It reveals those hidden, totally catastrophic gaps in your infrastructure that a manual or a pristine staging environment could never possibly show you.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Industry Impact. A mainstream movement. Because this architectural philosophy, it definitely didn't stay confined to Netflix. It escaped and basically spread like wildfire, fundamentally transforming modern software engineering across the globe. Just look at how far this has come. Today, chaos engineering is a core pillar of site reliability engineering, or SRE, which is a discipline heavily championed by tech giants like Google. It's even spawned a massive ecosystem of commercial tools, like Gremlin and the AWS Fault Injection Simulator. We're even seeing highly regulated enterprises in finance and healthcare adopting these offensive testing strategies just to meet strict compliance requirements. And Netflix themselves? Well, they've evolved way beyond the original Simian Army scripts into a highly sophisticated, fully automated testing environment known as ChAP, the Chaos Automation Platform. And this number, 99.99%, is the ultimate proof of impact. By systematically and deliberately creating downtime in their own infrastructure, Netflix forged an indestructible system capable of delivering 4 nines of availability to hundreds of millions of users. It's honestly just an astonishing technical achievement.
So what should you really take away from this explainer? Well, first, you have to accept that infrastructure failure is inevitable, but surprise is not. You control that narrative. Second, resilience has to be continuously designed into your architecture and relentlessly verified in live production. And third, practicing this builds unshakable confidence. Seriously, when your engineering team has deliberately broken every load balancer, availability zone, and microservice, and then watched it successfully auto-recover, they become absolutely fearless. And that fearlessness translates directly into faster, much safer deployments.
I want to leave you with this final, truly provocative thought. The best time to find out your parachute does not open is on the ground. That right there is the pure essence of chaos engineering. It challenges all of us to ask, have we actually verified the parachutes in our own systems? Or are we just sort of hoping they open when we need them the most? Something to definitely think about as you look at your own architecture. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.